As a 52-year-old high school teacher and a widower, my life has revolved around my daughter S. Since her mother passed away when S was just 7, I have dedicated myself to being both a father and a provider, striving to give her a good life despite the difficulties we faced. I worked hard, saved diligently, and aimed to instill in her the values of responsibility and the importance of money. When S got engaged, I initially didn't think much of her fiancé. He struck me as flashy and obsessed with designer brands, extravagant vacations, and showcasing their life on social media, none of which aligned with my values. However, I wanted to support S in her happiness, believing that as long as she was content, I could set aside my reservations. Everything changed when S presented her wedding plans. To my shock, she detailed an extravagant vision for her wedding that would cost an astounding $250,000. I was taken aback, unable to comprehend how she could expect me to fund such a lavish affair. My salary as a teacher simply could not accommodate such an expense. I calmly explained to her that while I loved her and wanted to contribute, I couldn't possibly finance a wedding that exorbitant. S's reaction was swift and intense. She accused me of being irresponsible, exclaiming that I was supposed to fund her wedding like other fathers did for their daughters. Her sense of entitlement shocked me. I reminded her that I had saved for my retirement and that my financial situation was not what she seemed to think. When I suggested a more reasonable budget of $115,000, still a hefty sum, far beyond what I felt comfortable offering, she exploded with anger and stormed out of the room. I believed she would come to her senses after a day or two, but I was gravely mistaken. Days later, while I was at work, my phone began buzzing incessantly. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just a group chat. But when I finally checked, I was horrified to see that S had publicly posted a lengthy rant about me on social media. In her post, she branded me a broke loser for refusing to fund her dream wedding. She painted a picture of me as a deadbeat father, dragging my name through the mud in front of her friends and followers. The comments that followed were equally devastating, with strangers criticizing me and saying that I was a terrible father for not giving her the wedding she wanted. It felt like a punch to the gut. This was my daughter, the one I had cared for, nurtured, and loved for 26 years, who now viewed me as the enemy simply because I wouldn't capitulate to her unrealistic expectations. The humiliation was unbearable. I felt betrayed and heartbroken, grappling with the reality that my relationship with S had devolved into this public spectacle over money. In response, I made the difficult decision to withdraw all my support and disinherit her, believing it was necessary for her to understand the value of money and hard work. Yet, despite my firm stance, she has now turned to begging for forgiveness. I find myself torn, grappling with the love I have for her and the hurt she has caused me. That night, I returned home, feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment. I was ready to confront my daughter about the recent conflict that had escalated. I was frustrated by her public outburst, where she had put me on blast over money, essentially airing our private matters for everyone to see. When I approached her, she barely looked up from her phone, dismissing my concerns with a flippant remark about how I embarrassed her by saying no. Fair's fair, right? She scoffed, crossing her arms as if the whole situation was just a game to her. I couldn't believe her audacity. This wasn't high school drama. She couldn't just post things about her own father online and think it was acceptable. I tried to explain, but she cut me off saying, maybe if you weren't so cheap, this wouldn't be an issue. At that moment, I reached my limit. I walked out of the room, realizing that if I stayed, I might say something I'd regret. For the next few weeks, the atmosphere between us was icy. She hardly spoke to me, and when she did, it was to throw petty jabs about how sad it was that I couldn't support her. Meanwhile, she left that damaging post online, seemingly milking sympathy from anyone who would listen. I watched helplessly as she manipulated our situation to gain attention and validation. Then, one morning, a friend sent me a link that made my blood run cold. It was a GoFundMe campaign my daughter had created, titled, Help me have the wedding of my dreams because my dad refuses to pay. I was in disbelief as I read her fabricated story about how I was too stingy to provide for her wedding. Strangers were donating money to fund this ridiculous event, and I felt utterly betrayed. This wasn't the daughter I raised. This was someone entirely different, selfish, manipulative, and cruel. That night, I made a difficult decision. I withdrew every bit of financial support I had been providing her. I had been helping her with rent, car payments, and even some credit card bills. But if she saw me as nothing more than an ATM, then I wouldn't let her have access to my money any longer. Along with that, I made what felt like the hardest choice of my life. I disinherited her. For years, I had planned to leave her everything I had when I passed away. But after everything that had transpired, I couldn't reward this kind of behavior. This was my last card to play, and I played it without hesitation. When I finally told her, she lost her mind. She showed up at my house, screaming and crying, accusing me of abandoning her. You can't just cut me off like this. I'm your daughter. You're supposed to take care of me. I looked her dead in the eye and calmly responded, not anymore. You made your choice. Then, for the first time, she dropped a facade of tears and revealed the real reason for her desperation. Her fiancé was threatening to call off the wedding if she didn't come up with the money. All of this, her public shaming of me, the fundraiser, the drama. It was never about me at all. It was about keeping her fiancé happy. I was stunned. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, had thrown me under the bus because she was scared her fiancé would leave her. Please, Dad, she begged, her voice cracking. Just help me this one last time. I'll make it up to you. I swear, I wanted to say yes. I really did, but I couldn't, not after everything. No, I replied firmly. I can't help you anymore. You're on your own. She broke down sobbing, hurling insults at me, calling me every name in the book, but I stood my ground. She left that night, and for a moment, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe she'd move on and figure things out. But, of course, that wasn't the case. A few days later, she posted again. This time, she accused me of being emotionally abusive, neglecting her, and being a terrible father who had never been there for her. It was all complete lies. Yet the narrative spread like wildfire, drawing in more messages of hate and scorn directed at me. I was furious. But more than that, I was done. She had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I gathered every screenshot, every post, every nasty message she had ever sent me, and sent it all to her fiancé. If she wanted to play dirty, then so could I. 2 days later, the wedding was called off. It turned out her fiancé didn't appreciate being lied to and dumped her on the spot.